Hello and welcome to Unit 6, Female Reproduction, Day 3. So today's aim is how does the female reproductive system support fetal development? And fetal development, we're talking about the growing baby. So remember, the male reproductive system is creating and transporting gametes. And in the female reproductive system, there is a baby that has to be protected, developed, and nourished inside of the uterus. So how does the female reproductive system support this development? Let's start with a little review of what we've covered already. What are the two primary hormones involved in the female reproductive system? We have, of course, estrogen and progesterone. And progesterone is going to be important here as we talk about fetal development because progesterone is the pregnancy hormone. And let's look at this diagram and analyze it a little bit. So we have here the ovary, and inside of the ovary, there are several follicles. And let's take a color that's not the same color as picture, right? There are all these follicles and they have ovaries at various stages of maturation. But this one ovary, or rather this one follicle that just burst, and we're seeing here ovulation, right? And that is the release of the egg from the follicle. And this is sort of like a journey through time, right? So we have ovulation, and then the oocyte is the egg that is waiting in the fallopian tube to be fertilized. So the oocyte is hanging out and it is waiting until some sperm come along. And remember, this is still all happening in the fallopian tube, right? This is the location of this. This is the ovary, and this is the fallopian tube or oviduct. And then once we get over here, this is now the uterus, and these are the walls of the uterus in green. So we have the egg with several sperm attempting to merge their nucleus, fuse the nuclei with the nucleus of the egg to get a fertilized egg, which you can see here. And it's showing two nuclei to indicate the genetic information in the egg and the genetic information in the sperm. Then we have the first cleavage. So again, the name for the fertilized egg is the zygote. Then the first cleavage, this is now cell division. So after this point, this is mitosis. And this is very early on in conception. So this is like right after the fertilization occurs. Day 1, the egg is fertilized. Day 2, we have the first division, the first cleavage. And then you can see there are 2 cells in there, 2-stage cell, 4 cells in there, 4-stage cell. And then these terms, you should recognize them. But the important one that you need to identify that in the ovulation video, they said looks like a little raspberry is blastocyst. And you can see there 8-cell uncompacted morula is just saying there's 8 little cells in there, but they haven't yet sort of been put together to become an organism. But then once we have the blastocyst, it's starting to look like maybe something different, maybe a larger sort of organism that is starting to form, not just a cluster of cells. But this is still very, very, very early on in the pregnancy. We're talking 10 days before it has even implanted in the wall of the uterus. And then once the blastocyst hatches out of this casing, we have it implanting. And this is, again, the sort of raspberry looking thing. implanting in the wall of the uterus. And that is the uterine lining or endometrium, which, if this didn't happen, if there was no fertilization, would be shed during menstruation. But we're talking about now a developing embryo. So this is after fertilization. What happens? How does the baby develop? So what is the term used to describe the union of the sperm and the egg? Fertilization. And that leads to the zygote, is a fertilized egg. Where does this process occur? So you can see here, this is the ovary, and this is the oviduct or fallopian tube. And they both mean the same thing. You can say either one. Based on the image above, what do you think a blastocyst is? And just sort of based on this image, what do you think it is? But the blastocyst, as you can see, is sort of the rapidly dividing cluster of cells. Right, like early on in pregnancy. Because you can see, sort of these cells are dividing early on in pregnancy, cluster of rapidly dividing cells, or just how about dividing cells? And you can see we're not using the term like embryo yet. So this is before embryonic stage, which is a term you may have heard before. Embryo is, this is all before a woman would even know that they were pregnant. So 8 to 9 days after ovulation, that's before even your next period. Right? Because ovulation occurs around day 12 of the cycle, and menstruation begins around day 28 or day 1 of the next cycle. So this would be like way before a woman even knows that they're pregnant, would be the implantation of the blastocyst. And even hormone levels wouldn't indicate pregnancy there yet. The hormone levels, progesterone levels, would begin to rise after the implantation of the blastocyst. So based on the image above, define ovulation, and you can see it there. What is ovulation? It is the release of the egg from the follicle. All right, so here we go. Here's some terms we've been using: embryo, fetal period. We can see here, prenatal death. Okay. Forgive me. So on the bottom here, this is what would happen if there was an error occurring during this time in the pregnancy. So if there is a problem happening in the first 2 weeks, there's just going to be a miscarriage, prenatal death. So this is the period of the dividing zygote, implantation, and the bilaminar embryo. So this is before it becomes an embryo. And you can see here, we have the implantation of the blastocyst. This is kind of the stage between the 8-cell dividing morula and the blastocyst. And this is now after it has implanted, sort of becoming the embryo stage. And right here by week 3, we have an embryo, but it looks, I don't know, like a fish. Like we haven't really got anything too human looking until we get to about weeks 8 or 9, starts looking a little bit more human, but still kind of looks like, I don't know, some kind of an alien. And when we look at in evolution, unit 8, when we look at the embryos of other organisms, oh boy, we're going to see that they actually look, and the fetus of other organisms, we're going to see that they look extremely, extremely similar to developing human babies because we're related. But then they're at 38 weeks, that is the baby, right? And some babies are born around 20 to 36 weeks. They can be born preterm, which just means before the full period of pregnancy, which is about 38 weeks or 9 months. All right, so let's interpret this data here. What organ system is developing throughout all of pregnancy? So which one of these lines goes all the way throughout? The only one there at the top. What organ system is this? It is the central nervous system. So the brain is developing throughout. So if you were a premature baby, your brain wasn't fully cooked. And no, I am really just kidding there. I was a premature baby. But the central nervous system is developing throughout the entire pregnancy, right? It begins here in week 3, we can see, but really those initial cells are also part of the central nervous system, just, not defined as such. All the way until week 38. And this is about interpreting this graph. So you can see up here, it says the dot indicates a common site of action of teratogen. So a teratogen is any chemical that can be hazardous to the developing baby or fetus. When do limbs appear to be adult-like? So we can see there by week 8 or 9, the limbs have stopped developing, the upper and lower limbs. So around week 8 and 9, or 8 to 9. How long does it take the upper limbs to fully develop? Again, this is all about interpreting this data. We can see here the upper limbs start developing around weeks 3 to 4 and stop developing around weeks 8 to 9. So on our broadest estimate, we have 6 weeks. On our smallest estimate, we have 4 weeks. So about 4 to 6 weeks. How will a harmful drug affect the embryo? So again, that is what a teratogen is. Harmful substance. And that isn't just drugs. So if you have ever known a pregnant woman, they can't eat things like sushi or soft cheeses because they could be harmful to the growing baby. We'll talk about the placenta on day 4, but there are mechanisms in place to protect the growing fetus. But obviously, a little baby wouldn't eat sushi itself. So if the chemicals like mercury that are sometimes present in sushi that wouldn't really hurt an adult could hurt the baby. Or even if there's a parasite present in the sushi, that probably wouldn't make the adult sick. It could make the baby sick. So again, really any harmful substance, including drugs, that would hurt the child is called a teratogen. So how will a harmful drug affect the embryo if it was added during the 4th week of pregnancy? You can see there it would impact the eyes, heart, or limbs. And it would cause abnormality. And you can see this word here, congenital, that we've used before. So congenital means occurring before birth, and these are major congenital anomalies. These are things that are going to majorly impact the life of this growing child. And, if they are born, they would, not be having such a good time with major issues to their eyes, their heart, or their limbs. These are things that really help you live, right? Even your limbs, you might think of as sort of like outside of your eyes and your heart, but obviously, if we're thinking like evolutionarily, if you don't have functioning arms or legs, it would be really hard for you to protect yourself, for you to move around, for you to acquire your own food. So these would not be good anomalies to have in your growing baby. So that is actually why exposure to teratogens is more dangerous early on in pregnancy, which is sort of a bummer because, like I said, early on in pregnancy, the woman may not even know that she is pregnant. So very early on in the pregnancy, weeks 3 and 4, women might, expose themselves to something that they don't realize is dangerous because they don't think that they are pregnant. And that could cause major issues to the growing baby. Okay, which cellular process allows the unborn baby to go from zygote to embryo to fetus? Why, that is cell division via mitosis, of course. Because we're talking about growth. All right, last question. Week 8 is when the unborn baby is no longer considered an embryo. It is instead called a fetus. What do you notice happened during week 8 that would cause a change in this classification? So in week 8, the heart, the upper limbs, the lower limbs have finished development. So we have sort of the outer structure of the body is done, and the eyes, the teeth, the external genitalia, the ears, and the central nervous system are sort of what's left to develop. And also here, the palate, which if you've ever seen a child that has a cleft palate, so they have a sort of like a space right here. That is because that is one of the last areas to close. So sometimes exposure to teratogens or genetic abnormalities can cause this cleft palate. So everyone has this sort of little, I think it's called a fibrum, this little bump over the top of your lip. And during pregnancy, what can happen in a very small percentage of cases is this is one of the last parts of the face to develop, and that palate cannot fully close. If that happens, the baby kind of has a little space right here where you can see their gums, you can see the inside of their mouth. It can sometimes cause issues with the teeth. It can sometimes also affect the nose. But this is a major problem. It impacts the baby being able to breastfeed. This is more common in certain parts of the world where there's a lot of environmental pollution. And fortunately, it is not very common in the United States, but it's usually fixed through plastic surgery very early on in the baby's life. But yeah, so you can see that happens. The palate stops developing between weeks 9 and 16. So, okay, we have the development of external limbs. Let's just call them limbs. Finishes. Embryo now is a fetus, as it more closely resembles a human. A human baby, right? This is all very, very, very early on into development until about week 9, which is a few months into pregnancy, and really until about week 20, you're still dealing with like mostly like a fish. But then by week 20, as you can see, it starts to look a lot more like a baby. So, all right, that chart can look a little confusing, but hopefully I helped you make some sense of it. Today's aim was, how does the female reproductive system support female development? That is all I have for you today, guys. I'll see you again on video tomorrow. Have a super fantastic day. Bye, guys.